everyone. Welcome to our webinar today.
And hello to you, and welcome to the webinar series called Addressing the Present, Building the Future. I'm Jean Parker, and we have a couple of really interesting guests with us today. First, a little bit about this webinar series. It's a collaboration between Ethical Business Building the Future, or EBBF, and the Wilmette Institute. And we have been running this webinar series since, I think, March, if I'm not mistaken. I want to introduce the two people who will be speaking with you today. They are joining us from Toronto or someplace nearby there. They can tell us exactly where they are. A daughter and mother duo of Avah and Mary Darling. Avah is 16 years old, and her interests include promoting service as necessary to a thriving world. She creates projects to help people gain the necessary tools to build better communities through changing mindsets. This is going to be really interesting. Right now, Avah says that the world is not connecting adequately with the youth, and that this very fact is hindering progress. Mary Darling is a mother first, but she is also a writer, director, and producer through her company, her film company called WestWind Pictures. She's best known for her producing of the award-winning Canadian TV series Little Mosque on the Prairie. And Avah and Mary are going to discuss how to include youth as part of the solution. So, Avah and Mary, over to you.
Thank you. We're both very excited to be here. It's really rainy here, but it feels bright. I think we're going to be following, we've done this talk a few times, and it's been a really wonderful journey for us learning, because it started out with just my mom coming along as emotional support as I did this for the first time, and it's formed into really an example of intergenerational cooperation as I listen to her insights, which are so much wiser than mine most of the time.
Not true.
But I wanted to start off because this talk is coming at a very interesting time in our world's history. We're literally in a point of breaking history. And these two forces, which are always with us, this force of disintegration and integration, are so present. It feels like our world is falling apart. First, it was with COVID and all of us at home. And now with finally the coverage that Black Lives Matter has always needed is coming to it. And all these acts are coming into the open. So I think we wanted to start a little bit with that. And the fact that this disintegration and integration creates this air of latent potential is what I was always, when I read Baha'i writings especially, it speaks of this potential that a world falling apart calls people to action, and especially youth. And what we're learning more and more is that in order to have full and functioning solutions to problems, we need unity and diversity. We need all the voices at the table. And along with this, we also need the joining, the intergenerational connection. When you look up intergenerational cooperation, very little comes up unless it's talking about talking to youth about their issues, but not talking to youth about all issues with their particular insight. But we can see in other cultures, especially here in Canada, this focus on youth.
Yeah, just last night we had a really interesting speaker named Bob Watts contribute to the discourse on race in Canada specifically. And one of the things that he really touched on that was so interesting is how in this Mohawk culture particularly, the youth are looked at as really champions of justice. And the idea of looking forward 7 generations and really thinking about how we're thinking about the world that we're leaving to our youth. and thinking forward as adults, not just as youth, is so important. We are lucky as we bring additional voices into the discourse around youth and adults working together towards the betterment of the world, to make sure that, as Ava was saying, every voice is given a seat at the table.
So I wanted to start off with this quote that was also used last night, that I'd heard quoted before, but never in its entirety, by Abdu'l-Baha. And he says, "Behold, a beautiful garden full of flowers, shrubs, and trees. Each flower has a different charm, a peculiar beauty, its own delicious perfume and beautiful color. Yet all the flowers, shrubs, and trees spring from the self-same earth. The same sun shines upon them, and the same clouds give them rain." So with that, over the past year, really, as a youth, I've been exploring how my age hinders the things I'm able to do, and how I'm listened to in social situations and in large events. And I'm so blessed to be able to do this, because in our society, this voice is never given to you. And honestly, I don't think I'm the best youth to be speaking and to have this opportunity. But I started to do some research. And like my mom said, in First Nations and Indigenous culture, there's this idea of looking 7 generations ahead and youth being the champions of justice. But as I looked back in my own culture, I saw the stagnant stereotypes that have been holding us back from this idea of intergenerational cooperation. So if we're looking back at the stages, we see the senior, and the senior is considered an infallible source of wisdom usually. Then we go down to the adults. In brief, the adult's whole purpose, it seems, in the past especially, was to gain material means and become comfortable in life. And then when we see the child should be seen and not heard. And when they became an adult, they could finally share their opinions and gain comfort, and then become infallible as a senior. And I don't even mention the teenager or the youth, because it didn't exist. This idea, this ideology didn't exist until World War I. The idea of a teenager being at a different stage of life, it wasn't even considered, even though our biological development at the time remained the same. So when looking back at these 3 stages that I mentioned before, and these are things that I've really been taught by my parents as I read literature as a child, you can see it as well, is that these stages are shaped very much like a hierarchy. Like you gain age like you do in some foods, and gain value as you get older. And you start at nothingness and you progress, really no matter of your character, but just because of your age.
But I was going to say, the attributes of youth, though, when paired with an adult or a senior, is like putting pure fuel into the tank. You know, it's something that if each party or generation is able to come to the table with a level of humility, in other words, as an adult who thinks that they've acquired knowledge or experience, the more that we're able to sort of sit back and say, sure, I've had that knowledge and experience, but maybe things have changed somewhat, to be able to fully explore what a youth is bringing to the table, especially when you talk about kind of attributes of youth. Like what would you say are the attributes of youth?
Well, I think I was just about to start getting into that, because if we look at the child again and kind of start to readjust our opinion and our inherent biases towards age, which you don't think about, but a child is bestowed with infinite imagination. And this is something I learned from my education in Montessori, is that the child is able to look beyond the boundaries that society kind of sets in stone for us as we get older and we feel we can't move. Children can completely surpass that level because they haven't experienced it yet. And Abdu'l-Baha even said that we should encourage the children from their earliest years to master every kind of learning, and make them eager to become skilled in every art. So the idea of the child being seen and not heard is so dangerous because they surpass these limitations that are set in stone when we get older. And then we come to the adults, and of course, their role isn't only to collect material means, but spiritual means. To work the Baha'i faith the Baha'i faith says in every single aspect of their life for to serve humanity, instead of just focusing on oneself and their own lives and their material means and their comfortable life, to serve humanity. He even says that, Abdu'l-Baha, some men and women glory in their exalted thoughts, but if these thoughts never meet the plane of action, they remain useless. And then another role of the adult is to actually harvest the child's creativity and wisdom. So we see this focus on the child. And then the senior, of course, has wisdom and has learned lessons throughout their time on Earth, but their role is also to use that wisdom and apply it to modern issues, to listen to, again, the child or the youth, and apply their wisdom in those situations instead of being afraid of those situations.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've been really thinking about, I mean, I'm the mom of 6 kids, 4 grown, and then Ava and Hayden are still at home. And one of the things I've really been thinking about in terms of intergenerational service and kind of building those rocket boosters is parenting. How do we parent our children to be empowered, but yet be respectful, to be able to walk into spaces with adults, really aware of the milieu that they're walking into, that not every adult understands or sees the value of youth, and what are the qualities that we should help our children and youth understand so that they can walk successfully into those spaces and contribute at the level of discourse that we hope that they can. And so for all of us as parents, I think it's really important to be thinking about how, as our children are growing, how to nurture in them a curiosity and a dedication towards the betterment of the world. And as we do that together, and the community, of course, is a large part of that. No parent is able to parent a child all by themselves. It makes a difference who you're surrounding your children with, and making sure that we're surrounding them with people who come from different cultures and who see children and youth in a variety of ways, so that they can gain that experience, so that by the time they're youth like Ava, there's a level of comfort in being able to engage and engage with adults around them.
Yeah, and I mean, with this recognition of the inherent special qualities that youth usually possess, if, again, the older generations actually encourage them, youth also have to learn to step into these situations with an air of humility. Not that I have all the answers, or that my opinion is somehow greater because of my age, just that it's wonderful that I get to engage with these people who have so much more wisdom than me, but also I'm able to be heard. And through consultation, not just the bringing up of my voice, we can hear this. But going back to, again, youth, I think it is important to address the history of youth. Really quickly, I mean, it didn't even, the word teenager didn't even come around until the 1920s after World War I, and that's because compulsory high school education was created. So it created like a counterculture, a social counterculture outside of childhood and adulthood. And then after World War II, different companies got a hold of this, and the commercial obsession with teenagers began. We started to define them, and we started to materially define what they may like. And most of that was geared towards independence, rebellion, freedom. People had been turning 13 for centuries, but only in the 20th century was it decided that this gap between childhood and adulthood should be named. As soon as teenagers were invented, they were feared by almost everyone. A New York Times critic wrote in 1957, quote, "The abolition of child labor and the lengthening span of formal education has given us a huge leisure class of the young with animal energies never absorbed by the task of production." So now that there was no labor for these teenagers to engage in, they were dangerous. And Edgar Hoover published an FBI report that read, "The nation can expect an appalling increase in the number of crimes that will be committed by teens in the years ahead." So
Set the bar low.
Yeah, I read this and I was so confused because at that point, the invention, the commercial obsession with teenagers was so new. And yet this FBI report was saying that it will be expected. They set the bar low. They won't excel. It will be expected that these crimes will be committed. I remember when I was in grade 6, I turned 13 or 12, and I was starting to kind of become a teenager. And everyone in my school, all my teachers were kind of comforting me and saying, it's okay. Don't worry, we'll get through this together. Like it was some force field that I had to navigate and that I may not get through. And it's just this horrible thing that, don't worry, it's okay. We'll get through it together and we'll push through it, instead of let's use those animal energies, as they said in 1957, and direct them towards something that is productive and serving humanity. Because youth, and I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot.
That's okay.
Here,
I like that.
Youth have a lot of unique attributes. And again, this is something I just started thinking about when I was traveling last year. And it's that since we're in this bridge of childhood and adulthood, we have the imagination and the determination of a child, which we've all experienced, this determination that even if something seems impossible, a child will continue to pursue it. But we also have the logic and critical thinking of an adult, so we're starting to develop that. And then mixed within that, we have this passion and longing for independence and change that youthdom brings. So it seems like the perfect combination for a change maker, a change bringer, someone who can literally move the world.
Yeah, and we're seeing that in our own neighborhood as we've been in sort of home more. Typically, we tend to travel a lot, and we've always made our community sort of our kids' friends, parents. So that's been our community that we spend the most time with. And I think what's really happened during COVID is Avah and Hayden decided that they wanted to explore our neighborhood, to really get to know our neighbors, to be thinking about how do we create together a community where youth and children and adults are all in it together. I mean, God forbid if the worst happens, what are the skills and abilities? What are the potentialities towards building unity in a single neighborhood? And I think as we've been looking at that and we've been working on that project together and in that conversation together, it's been really wonderful to engage together as intergenerational, besides the fact that I'm an older mom for Avah, we see the benefits that come through the experience that we have, but also having to humble ourselves to not assume that we've got it all figured out, and then bring in the youth voices to experiment, to see how do we build a community of service together in our own neighborhood.
And this is beginning to be a discourse in society, especially when it comes to things like climate change, these global crises, and adults and politicians are even looking at youth and saying, oh, they're really passionate. They seem to know what they want to do. They're protesting. And so there's these two mindsets of youth that are very conflicting, and yet everyone seems to possess both of them. There's that youth are a troubled generation, Gen Z. We're addicted to our phones. We're selfish, immature, and only seeking out one emotion, fun, just to have fun in everything we can. And the second mindset is that youth are the change and that they are our only hope. So we have to hand everything to them. when really it's actually a combination of these two mindsets that makes up a youth. And if I'm talking about myself in particular, I can be passionate and capable and creative, but I can also be incredibly lazy.
Only occasionally.
Immature, very immature. But when combined my passion and my capabilities with adults, we can solve these global crises, because we're taking all of these resources we have, and we're so rich in resources when we combine these generations and bringing them together to solve these issues that seem completely unsolvable right now.
I think in our society too, I see that there's a comment on the chat about the idea of a lack of value in the of the older generation. And I think it's very important that we begin to get a handle on that. And I honestly feel like the only way to do that is to do it together. It's not necessarily going to come from policy changes or from the top down. This is something that we have to look at together. And one of the things, as we were over the last years actually thinking about intergenerational service together, is recognizing that so often if you Google intergenerational service, it'll come up either around, as Avah said, sort of how do we engage in the youth discourse? So in other words, how do we help youth figure themselves out? Sure, that seems fine. We can engage in that discourse. And it's also around geriatrics. How do we get the youth to take care of us? which again isn't such a bad thing. I mean, I think that shifting the value, as Avah said before, when we're actually thinking about seniors as well and how we care for them, that comes again through an intergenerational approach. I mean, it's an intergenerational approach as we're raising kids and training kids and thinking about service in general. I think we need to reinforce, what does it mean to be human? If our identity is our soul, then our soul is ageless. And why wouldn't we be caring for and engaging with the knowledge and insight of the older generation when it should be so valued? Again, going back to our talk from last night, the idea of elders. Somehow in our history, that idea of elderly people really contributing to in a very active, ongoing way in society has been diminished. But it's sort of another piece of the conversation that needs to take place. And because the focus of this particular presentation is on just trying to get the youth voice more strongly into the conversations and the discourses around the betterment of our world, I think we'll keep it at that. But certainly that is something that needs to be addressed and needs to be focused on with youth and adults, so that we don't see what we've seen in Canada and the US and elsewhere, where COVID has swept through these nursing homes and with seeming little regard to the care of our elderly, our elders.
Yeah. So I think I wanted to address that as well, just as my last point is I recently when I started thinking about all this, I got the wonderful opportunity to work with my parents on a documentary about the reform of the UN, which is a whole other talk in itself. So I won't even begin to go into that. But they believed in my potential and my capabilities, which was shocking that they would take me on this trip around the world to talk about the UN with incredibly wise and intelligent adults. And I knew nothing at all.
You knew something.
Well, very little. So they took me out on this journey. Thank you. And what I learned was that I was so curious and so excited, and the credible voices I was talking to, I came back with so many ideas, so many actionable ideas, because my prior knowledge, which had been very small, especially in that regard, had become enriched. So even the idea that I got this opportunity to work with people who were so credible, so wise, so intelligent, and changing the world in immense ways. And even though I wasn't changing the world in immense ways or had a PhD in global affairs or something, I was able to offer up an opinion of practical usage of their knowledge and of ways to reach the youth in this film. And I think I offered up my perspective as any youth would, as a young person living in the midst of rapid change ever since my birth. And I was given a stage to voice my thoughts on. These adults, my parents in this case, and their crew opened the door for me to speak my voice, but I also came back humbled because my opinions had been enriched by the wonderful discourse I was engaged in as a naive youth. So if you don't have anything else to say.
Do I have anything else to say?
Do you? I don't know.
I think that the naivete of youth, as Ava just mentioned, is sometimes looked at as a negative thing. And I don't see it as a negative thing at all. I see it as the means to take permission to try new things and permission to not become old and stagnant. So, really offering us the ability to be able to think about things greater than ourselves. And I see this idea of becoming a grandparent then as being a real benefit to the youth community around us. And again, as I said earlier, helping to train the youth to understand that those voices are also really, really important. So there's sort of two things that happen in that. There's the back and forth of a youth maybe thinking that they have all the answers and coming into a room and reinforcing a stereotype that doesn't leave room for other people. And then there's very many different manifestations of that. So anyway, I'll leave it at that so we can move on to the Q&A.
I just wanted to end off with a quick quote by Abdu'l-Baha, since this has all been about harvesting intergenerational teamwork for social good. And Abdu'l-Baha says, "And the honor and distinction of the individual consists in this, that he, among all the world's multitude, should become a source of social good. Is any larger bounty conceivable than this, that an individual, looking within himself, should find that by the confirming grace of God, he has become the cause of peace and well-being, of happiness and advantage to his fellow men? No, by the one true God, there is no greater bliss, no more complete delight."
Wonderful.
Thank you. What a great way to end. So there are several questions. One of them is about humility, and I want to ask you to expand on this idea of humility coming from both of your sides. I think there might be a belief that, as you said, the youth is supposed to be humble to the adult, or to be in some way looking up to the adult. What you're proposing is something different than that in many ways. So can you expand on humility and how that comes into play for both of you?
You want to start?
Sure. I think humility in an intergenerational standpoint, I guess, comes from mutual respect. So for me to become truly humble, it wasn't that I was looking up to of course I'm looking up to the adult, but it wasn't like I felt I had to be silenced around the adult. It was that I felt that my opinions and my viewpoint was valued. So in that way, I was so excited and so curious to learn. And that brought with it humility, because I was looking for the knowledge of the adults who also had the idea that they were giving their knowledge to me so that I could use it towards the betterment of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that humility in general is something that our culture doesn't really foster. So this idea of being humble before something greater than yourself first, to know that there's something greater than yourself and that you simply don't have all of the answers is the first thing to kind of help center an idea in true humility. And then to enter a space with youth where, there can be a lot of energy and a lot of ideas and a lot of excitement, in that space, is to really learn how to listen as an adult, to not expect that you have all the answers, and especially not to take a posture of somehow either I'm older or wiser, and both of those things may actually be true. I may be older and more experienced in a certain area, but it never, if you don't take on this posture of a sort of an ongoing willingness to learn, you end up in a situation where you have all the answers and there's no room to actually genuinely create space to hear a youth voice.
Yeah, because then I think it also causes a chain reaction.
Yeah.
Why youth will come in feeling as if they are superior is because I know constantly with my friends as well, who are all very intelligent and wonderful people who have so much to add, they are shut down or ignored in conversations with people who are older than them. So then when they come into a situation where they feel as if, or same with me, I feel as if I have to prove myself somehow, and I have to be self-righteous and kind of invasive in the situation, which leads to, the complete opposite of
It leads
humility.
to all of the energy in the room going in the wrong direction. Yeah.
So yeah.
There's a question about technology, and I want to preface it by saying that if I need to do something complicated, I get someone who's under 12 to do it, or to help me do it. I suppose there are a lot of people in that position. So my question, though, is there, and there's a question about this as well, is about technology and the fact that technology natives or digital natives tend to be the younger people. There are lots of older people who use technology too, but we didn't grow up with it. And so do you think that's a leveler in society of knowledge and kind of innate experience, where younger people have this ability to work in the technological world in different ways than people who didn't grow up with it?
Yeah, this is actually one of my favorite subjects because
Oh, cool.
the idea I'm also reading one of the questions on the chat which talks about this, is the idea between social media and technology and the controversy within that is so strong. And I think yes, we have this endless knowledge source that we can look up anything in the world and find some sort of answer. And there are pros and cons to that. But there's a few things that social media or technology has really given us. And part of that is this global community that we can have conversations with. But I think a lot of the time, especially if I'm talking about social media, and it says on the chat that used for materialistic means. Um, and we see kids my age walking around staring at their phones instead of looking out at the world. And I think because of the negative view on social media, it makes teenagers, because teenagers are very influenced, right? It's another trait. Not all teenagers, but it's a trait of the age. Um, so by looking at this negatively and saying, get off your phone, why are you so addicted? Addicted is one of those trigger words. It makes teenagers believe that they need this thing and that social media is to be addicted on, if that makes any sense, that it is only negative, and it can't be used in any positive way, when really it is one of the most powerful tools we have. And I think these global crises, or just these crises across the world, nothing can be hidden anymore. And especially with the the death of George Floyd, which sparked this international outrage. I've seen people on social media really using it for social good and using it for what I believe social media should be used for. So I think if we start encouraging our youth to change the narrative around technology as a well of knowledge and as a platform for advertising the betterment of the world, or using your voice, which is hard to say, and it may seem so utopian, but when I look at the many kids that I know, that's what they want to do. They just don't know how, and then they feel guilty for being on their technology. So it's a very long-winded answer.
Yeah, but we talk about it a lot in our family too, because technology, we see it really as a tool that should be used for the betterment of the world. It doesn't mean that the kids, aren't allowed to look at, memes and look at clothing or do that. But we're very, very involved in, even still, in what our kids are doing on social media, what the youth are up to, because it actually is such an engine for change. And to be thinking about what is a use of this technology that can really give back and really amplify voices and things like that. This idea, I don't subscribe to the idea that technology is bad. I think that our kids have to very much know how to use the technology, which will drive their futures forward and amplify their voices in the right way. But I would bring it back to what is the expression that's being amplified, and it really comes back again to the value of a child, the value of a youth, and as adults and parents and grandparents, to really be engaging in what are the conversations we are having with our kids, so that they understand that inherently. I don't know that it works very well the other way around, where you just tell your kid, no, don't do that. Use it like this, use it like that. Instead, I think that whatever expression is, whether a child is making a piece of art for the fridge when they're little, or a youth is making a poster for a cause they're interested in, or they're serving in their neighborhoods, that it really comes back to this constant well of conversations that are happening in families and in communities around the value of each of these stages of life, Ava.
Yeah, it's to summarize what Bill said, it's reinforcing the positive usage of this powerful tool instead of stripping it away as some sort of punishment.
Nabil and Anne want to know about how to encourage youth in today's world to make the world a better place and to just not get discouraged. We're in a bad time.
Well, I think not a lot of encouraging actually has to be done. Naturally, youth are prone to engaging in these social movements and trying to fix the world's problems. I mean, we can see it ever since the 60s, really. And even in history books before it was named, you can see it in that age as well. So I think that for adults, it's more, and again, this is just my opinion as a 16-year-old, it's more opening those doors to spaces, whether that's a difficult conversation at the dinner table that parents are having.
We've had those.
No. But I mean more like a conversation about Black Lives Matter that a mother and a father are having, and that a child may not, or a teenager may not feel intelligent enough to step into, or feel like they may say something wrong. I think it's inviting youth to discourses, inviting them to opportunities, instead of coming up to them and saying, you have a lot of potential, use it for the good of the world, because it's hard to listen to someone when they tell you something that's straight, I think, but giving them opportunities where they become addicted to serving the world and practiced and confident.
Yeah, I think encouragement, though, is one of the, it's the word which really sums up the teachings of Baha'u'llah. you know? And I think that this idea of encouragement across generations is very, very important. So, there's times where I'm using my technology and one of the kids will be like, no, that's not how you do it. That's not how you do it. And when I'm encouraged to keep learning it and empowered, and it's okay to tease me, by the way, but it really does make a difference, so that I realize in myself that I can continue to grow and develop in this area. And it's no different. It's no different for our youth, that it is a scary time. I mean, I think Clark and I are very constantly aware, especially for Ava and Hayden and for our grandkids, that they're growing up at a time that is different than times that we've grown up in. And so we're aware of that. And we're also aware of how we're having conversations in front of our kids and with our kids, because they have their whole lives ahead of them. And their defining moment doesn't need to be COVID. Their defining moment is what they're doing with their lives in every minute of them, as related to raising families themselves and educating their own children and their own grandchildren in the future. So to make sure that we are also hopeful for the future, and that we see our place in building something new, and then in partnership with our youth and with our parents, we're engaging. So for me, it's maybe less about encouragement and more about action and service together.
There's a question here about use of the media, and I'm going to add in also technology, about using or participating in media and technology without being victims, or by keeping one's agency, keeping one's autonomy, and understanding how to judge and assess things that you find in the media and technology, online technology, social media, and so forth, whether or not that's useful to you or how to interact with it. I hope I got that question correct, Arthur. I'm sure you'll let me know if you want to add to it.
I just realized I have a light bulb over my head all the time, so I must have all the answers.
This is what we're talking about.
One of the things I think about as a media maker is this idea of using the media to reflect back to society something greater than it has. And that's not something that we see a lot if we watch mainstream television or, streaming media and things like that, is that you'll realize how much of the media in general is really reflecting back the worst parts of society. And producers who I know well will say, yes, but we have to understand the underbelly of civilization in order to understand how to change it. And I feel like, well, I don't feel like that's necessary. I mean, I think we should always be concerned with the day in which we live, and that we should be trying to change and alter that. And so I use part of the lens that I use as I'm viewing and thinking about how not to become a victim of those things, is to think about what I'm engaging with in media and why. And so sometimes I'll watch a show that is maybe more on the raw side, in order to understand, well, what's going on with race or what's going on. But I know why I'm watching it. I'm not just a victim swirling around and I heard that's really good, and so I'm going to watch it. And I'm thinking about what it's doing to me, my true being, if that doesn't sound too pretentious to say. But when I think about my soul and I think about the things that I want to be recalling even in the next world, I think about what it is that I'm ingesting, what's going to be part of my memory going forward. So I do think that we have to think about what it is that we're eating, or what we're feeding ourselves.
And I think as a youth too, when I was talking about the commercial obsession that started in the 50s, and it's been like that ever since. And Netflix is really geared towards my age as its nucleus, and things like that. And again, social media and credibility. So I think that a positive thing that has come out of the internet, there's been many, but one of them has been how now kids in school learn about credibility and about ways to decipher if, for example, a website or something like that is credible. And it's much more difficult on social media. And I think we still fall victim to the lack of credibility or fake credibility. And I think a way we can change that is, again, it comes back to intergenerational teamwork, is listening to credible voices around us as well. So we're not always depending on this void of knowledge, which may be true or may not be true and can easily be faked as truth. But we're also coming back to the people we know to have these discourses, if that makes sense.
Keeping the conversation going.
Yeah, instead of just, like was said, falling victim to this endless void of voices.
Yeah, being a plaything of the media.
So being an active participant. Yeah. Vahid, are there any questions in the YouTube or Facebook feeds? And if not, I have another question for you.
There was one that I thought was interesting that's touched upon by both Charla and Zareen. They are inquiring about a little bit the other side of the conversation, if we can say that, regarding how elder people might be marginalized in different ways in society, and how this intergenerational collaboration you mentioned might be emphasized or brought upon at a larger scale to avoid this effect of marginalizing elder people in particular. Do you have ideas about that or suggestions?
Yeah, I think that something that I forgot to mention earlier was that it is equally as much of a responsibility for the youth as it is for the adults to harbor this intergenerational cooperation, because again, like we were touching on before, when it comes to humility and entering these spaces with humility, youth, since they don't see anyone else taking action in the way they are with, the vigor, and even if we're talking about protests, they do believe that they become fed up with the world, and this feeling of superiority has spread around a lot of teenagers that, okay, they've had their chance, they messed up, which is always the feeling of the youth in the past, and the adults always feel like, oh, these guys, they shouldn't be trusted. So I think that it's also a responsibility for any youth listening, and this is something I've had to come to terms with too, as the media has reinforced this idea that it's youth's turn to take over or something, is that we literally cannot do it without the past knowledge. We can't move forward without history and without these lessons and without these experiences. And so when we are marginalizing, and I saw it was a question too about, or mom brought up nursing homes. My own father is a senior, right? And speaking with him and having these discussions with him teaches me so much. So when we are pushing back the wisest section of humanity and treating them like they're leaving soon, so
or even worse, treating them like pets or something, like
with nursing homes.
I just, it's disgraceful how we are engaging with our older people in North America in particular. That we get old and then we're put away, and then somehow our voices are quieted and it doesn't really matter, and we miss out on so much. So again, I'll take it back to training our youth to understand the value of people at every age and what it is that they hold and can contribute. And our job should just be to be constantly mining these experiences so that those people with the imagination and the excitement and the energy can pull it forward, but they should never be doing it on their own. I just think it's such a travesty that we look at our youth and we're like, it's your turn. Well, what do we expect to be different than when it was our turn or their turn before us if it goes without this cooperation. We can't not just be handing off to the youth as though they know everything. We need to be working together, and so much more pulling on the experience of our elders. I mean, what I see in the world around me in terms of our elderly people, I just think it's absolutely disgraceful that we don't draw on knowledge and wisdom, and also allow our elderly to never be done learning, and to take those steps of humility to truly understand what it is that they have to contribute. I mean, I know for Avah, she's surrounded by people who she can draw on various experiences from, and it just makes such a huge difference in our children's lives to do that.
And I think humility and respect are two qualities, especially, that have to be taught, and we're not born with them. Well, I mean, I'm sure somehow I'm not going to get into a huge philosophical conversation here, but I was just going to say that in many, I've struggled with what is humility, and is it insecurity as humility? It's there's so many questions surrounding that. That's another one of the plentiful reasons why adults, and especially parents, are so important. But we should be teaching humility and respect, not like you are lesser, so you must listen to the higher, but that, it's so fascinating what the people who are older than you have lived through. So listen, add to your own knowledge, and add to theirs, and make it this mutual. So I think humility,
why do we separate by generations? It makes no sense. Exactly. Why?
The dichotomy.
Total dichotomy.
Vahid, are there any more questions on the YouTube?
Yes.
Or the...
Patty was asking about becoming a loving family, because I think it transpires from what we've heard in just half an hour that there's a lot of love going on in Avah and Mary's family. So people were trying to understand what's the secret to that, apparently.
Oh, wow.
Well, and actually that feeds into the question I wanted to ask, and I'm going to ask it because it's along these lines. How did you get this way? Right. So I'm sure there are people in the audience saying, oh man, I'm raising kids. How do I get to be them?
I can give a try, because first of all, our family is like every other family. It has its ups and downs. It deals with its own things, but
we just don't do the downs on Zoom.
We don't do the downs on Zoom. Yeah, well, we do occasionally. We don't mean to, but really, I would say it really comes down. It really comes down to the teachings of Baha'u'llah for us. Baha'u'llah's teachings have created a roadmap and an understanding around the value of all people, and really understanding the nobility of a child, and for a child to understand what his or her responsibilities are towards a parent. And what that does is it creates a really wonderful sort of openness that allows our family to deal with things in real time. And so, some of you will know that we have a very large family. It's a blended family. There are 8 kids all together. 6 of those I can take credit for actually birthing into this world, which is insane. And the family,
I don't know what's wrong with you.
If something's wrong with one of us, if somebody's upset, and my older kids will attest to this, and I'm not even sure who all is listening, but none of us can stand to leave it sit and fester. There's no such thing as like 1 second with somebody suffering in our family. We all kind of get in there and try to figure out what's wrong and how we can support and deal with it. And that kind of idea of becoming, I'll say from my standpoint, I've always raised my kids making it clear that you are each other's best supports, and I expect you to be there for each other through thick and thin, and to be there for me as well.
Yeah.
And that this idea that we're going to die and progress together forever means that the unity that we build here in this world is essential. And so we don't really leave anything unsaid. If Avah and I are having a difficulty, we deal with it immediately.
In real time. But I think it's also that the Baha'i writings talk about how the family unit, you can't have real not discourses, but interactions with people outside your family if your family unit is completely insincere. And so there's many things in our family that we do to ensure this, because of course we're all very talkative, clearly passionate people. But we know that we have to constantly work, even if it's trying to perfect. And of course, we'll never get there. But our family unit and these relationships, because they are what will last, hopefully, and we want to make them last. And then also that we consult in every single matter, as the Baha'i writings say,
whether we want to or not.
Whether we want to or not. And matters big or small. That's a sentence that is said very often in our households. So that we're constantly with each other through all our struggles, because we're consulting with them together. So I think, yeah, you're right when you say that the teachings of the Baha'i faith, for me especially, have always kept me on track, even when I waver. And then also just having supportive parents who use the intergenerational discourse we're talking about right now to respect my opinion and open doors for me. So then I respect them mutually, because I don't feel any resentment.
And talk about the place of love, this idea of love. I mean, clearly love is at the root of everything that you're talking about, but can you put words to that?
There's this wonderful quote from Abdu'l-Baha where he says, "Where there is love, nothing is too much trouble, and there is always time." And I would say that that's a real, it's a real building block in our own family. This idea that we're a very busy family. Like Clark and I work from home. We're running a company. We're together a lot, especially with COVID. We're together a lot. And our deadlines are always too tight. And we probably take on too much. But this idea that love is constant, and it's a continuum, and that in fact, even in the next world, we're told that there's no sort of time or place, which is so interesting. And so when I think about that quote and we bring it into our own family, it creates the time, to do, like my favorite thing these days is doing a 1 hour Nana story Zoom time with Ava's nephews.
Very confusing, with her grandchildren.
Yeah, with grandchildren. And that idea, sometimes I'll get the little text to say, "Is Nana story time on today?" And I'm in the middle of something that's insane. And I just think, where there's love, nothing is too much trouble, and there's always time. And when I go on and I have that time with my grandkids, especially since I can't be with them in person these days, it gives me energy. And so I realize what that quote means is that it becomes the fuel then that takes me forward to do more. So I think the role of love, it isn't just love. It's love first, but it's also really training and consultation, so that we understand that we're in it together, and that it's up to us to manifest that together. And I just want to say one more thing, because Avah was saying about the family unit. The Baha'i writings make it clear that it's the first building block of civilization.
That's what it is. That's what it is.
And that this first building block, if we can't manifest it in our own family, it's much harder to go out and to be able to work for the betterment of our communities, because the sort of the muscle that comes through a family that's trying to figure it out together through good times and bad, and through extreme difficulties and things like that, that family unit never loses its luster as something that we need to constantly sort of burnish and keep polished, so that we can take and manifest that in the world. So yeah, there's no big secrets. I think it's communication and consultation and love, and understanding the value of our kids, and them understanding the value of parents, and understanding that we're going to die and that we're going to progress together.
Yeah, that is actually, I hadn't thought about that.
And it better be good.
That's a whole other webinar. is where do you guys go together in the worlds beyond. I want to thank you for joining us today. I hope that people have enjoyed this. And I think that there will be more to come from Avah and Mary. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.